Number 1. The noise. Sometimes you get a little pissed off with the weather reports. I am sure everyone at some point has to admit. I understand that weather reports never claim to be 100% accurate, and the weather could be unpredictable. But when they make a very big and colossal mistake, those are the ones that irritate me. I go camping several times a year, and it's one of my absolute favorite things to do. I do a lot of my work from home, freelance, so it is easy for me to be able to go off and do whatever I want most of the time. That means that some of the times, that if I want to take a spontaneous camping trip, or something like that, I can. When the story takes place, I was feeling a bit restless, so I began looking around on the internet at some of my favorite camping areas. I began checking the 10-day weather reports for all of them, determined to find one where the weather would be beautiful. In actuality, all my areas were just fine, so I just decided where I was going to go. I do not feel comfortable mentioning the place here though, and decided to get away for about a week. I found myself quite looking forward to being outside and away from everything. But I would be bringing my cell phone with me the majority of the time. I would likely be too far in the country to make it work. But other than that, I would be far away from any sort of technology and information about what is going on in the world. The beginning of the trip worked out absolutely fine. There was no real need for me to go into too much detail about it, to just try and make the story long. Just know that for the first couple days, I was out there, and it was bright and beautiful. The humidity may have been a little higher than I would have liked it. That didn't bother me too much. About 4 days into my camping trip, I was hiking and headed along this very long creek. Around noontime, the weather began to change. I saw it first creeping up over the horizon, some of the darkest clouds I'd ever seen in my life, and I could tell that they were moving very fast. And although it was far enough away that I was unable to hear any thunder yet, I was definitely seeing the lightning. At first I was upset, because there had been nothing in the weather reports indicating that this would happen. But I didn't dwell on it too long. I noticed the clouds were moving rather quickly, and it was important for me to go and set up my camp for shelter even quicker than that. I had to get a bit uphill from the creek I was following. I didn't want to take a chance on having the creek flood up and get me. The wind began picking up as I struggled to get my tent up. Flaps of the tent kept hitting my face and twisting around the poles as I tried my best to be patient. I didn't bother doing anything except putting the tent up and then getting all of my equipment inside. After that, I spent a little bit of time outside, watching as the storm got closer quickly. The wind was blowing fiercely, and it wasn't long before the storm clouds completely covered the sky. It looked like it was nighttime already, and it was only around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. When the rain began falling, I took shelter in my tent. My tent had a plastic see-through window on it, so I was able to watch the storm from inside the tent. The wind kept threatening to pull my tent up and out of the ground. I had secured it really well, but I am no match for Mother Nature. Not only was this storm fierce, it was also long. I had hoped it was going to be one of those quick passing storms, but I soon found out that was not going to be the case. It took me through the entire afternoon and into the evening in darkness. However, it did calm down somewhat in the early night, but not by very much. I was reading while listening to the storm when I heard something. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but it sounded like a scream. And I didn't think for a second that it was a loon or some other sort of animal. It sounded like a human scream. Of course I was chilled, but it got worse when I heard it again. And the second time, it was even more agonizing than the first time, and louder, much, much louder. I wasn't cold at all, but I found myself shivering. I turned off my light. Yeah, I have to admit in retrospect, turning off one's light in order to listen better makes absolutely no sense. But for some reason, it was what I felt like I was supposed to do. Another scream came. This was followed by several more. I really wasn't sure what to do. but I figured if another human being was out there and in danger, I should try to go and find them. I took my knife, the only weapon I had on me, and got ready to go out into the storm. When I got out of my tent, my nerves were already shot. I had no idea what I was looking for, much less what I would find. I had only heard the screaming from while I was inside of my tent, and that didn't make it easy to know where it was coming from. I heard the screaming once more, and that is when I realized it was coming from the east of where I was standing. And not being in the tent, I knew it was definitely the screaming of a human being. I followed the sound, waiting to hear it again. I wondered how far away it was. I also wondered what sort of help I could be at all. I heard the scream again, and I kept following the direction that I was going. The last scream I mentioned was the actual last scream that I heard, but I had a good idea where it had come from. I followed it, desperately trying to find out what was making the screaming. I spent a lot of time out in the rain, trying to find something, but I didn't hear any more screaming, and I didn't find anything at all. After a lot of time, I made it back to my tent all wet and muddy. After cleaning myself up the best I could, I tried my best to get some sleep. The following day I did some investigating, trying to see if there was something that I had missed in the dark and the storm. After a lot of looking around in the areas that I had heard the screaming coming from, I found an old watch and some broken plastic, but nothing that really told me what was going on the previous night. I went back to the tent to pack up my camp. When I got there, I was shocked to find that my campsite had been attacked. My tent had been obviously shredded with a knife, and my belongings scattered around. As I cleaned up, I could only think to myself that maybe this was done by whomever had been making that person scream the night before. I didn't think it was a prank though, because it seemed like an awful lot of effort for a prank. Still, I found the whole thing very disturbing. I decided to cut my trip short and hike back to my car and go home. I reported what had happened there, but I don't think anything ever came of it. Number 2, the field. I was walking home from school. I had this really weird school district. The town had voted for a decrease in funds for the school, and for some reason, one of the things they cut was the amount of students who would be riding the bus to and from school. Basically, any kid who was within a certain distance would end up having to walk to school or be driven by their parents. I didn't live in town, but I lived close enough to town that I was not one of the students that got picked up by the bus. My parents were able to drive me to school, but unless I waited hours for them to get off of work, I would have to walk home in the afternoon. The vast majority of the time I would walk home, and it would take me a little bit less than an hour to get there. I was in the 8th grade when this happened, and I was at the age where I spent a lot of time alone thinking, and by this time, I quit relying on my parents to give me rides home. I also didn't really have a way to contact them if I needed to get a ride home. This was before mobile phones, and our school didn't have a payphone. This day was a warm spring day. I distinctly recall having PE class outside this day, and it was lovely. This was up until about an hour before school got out. Around that time, while sitting in class, I noticed it getting darker outside. Looking out the window, I noticed that storm clouds had taken over the sky in what seemed like nothing but a matter of seconds. The wind began to pick up a bit as well. I found myself hoping that the remaining school time would go by a lot quicker than normal, so I could get home before it rained. Obviously a silly way to think, but I also found myself paying less attention to class than I was paying to the weather outside. After school let out, things went as normal. Most of the students walked, so there were big crowds walking home. The crowd will get smaller and smaller as most students found their own streets home. Pretty soon it was just me. I normally take a walk home by following the roads. However, there was a shortcut through a field that I could sometimes take if I need to get home as quickly as possible. It was a big field, but cutting through it always saved me more time. and I had been waiting for this storm to break for a while. I really didn't want to get caught in it. A scary flash of lightning, followed by a burst of loud thunder, was what convinced me to cut across the field. I wasn't one to run, but I was walking fast. One of the things I hate the most is getting rained on, so I did my best to hurry as much as I can, without running. The hurrying didn't help really. It didn't take very long after I had gotten into the field itself, and the rain began coming down. It wasn't so hard at first. I thought I would be able to still get home before it began pouring if I was lucky. This proved very quickly to be incorrect though. The rain began to fall harder, and it was just a torrent in no time. I was soaked in no time, and I couldn't get the rain out of my eyes. I began running toward the only shelter that I could make out. There was a huge tree not very far away from me, and as I ran toward it, hoping to find at least a little shelter, even though I was already soaking wet, I tripped and fell at one point. It took me a few moments to get myself back up on my feet, but the moment I was on my feet, the most frightening thing to ever happen to me happened. It was all so quickly. Within a second, I saw a branch of lightning shoot down right in front of me, hitting the tree that I was looking for shelter under. In that moment, the tree seemed to explode in orange flashes, which were accompanied by the loudest explosion I had ever seen in my life. The force of this, or the shock of this, I'm not sure which one, caused me to fall down into the dirt and mud once again. When I got back up, I could see that the tree was on fire. The fire, however, was going out quickly, due to the rain pouring down so quickly. I stood there for a few moments, trying to take in what had just happened. I had no way of knowing for sure, but if I hadn't slipped into the mud that first time, I might have made it to the shelter of the tree, and if I was leaning up against the tree trunk when the lightning hit it, who knows what may have happened. After that, I didn't even hurry home. Getting continuously soaked by the rain was not a big deal compared to what had just happened, and it really was not like I could get any wetter anyway. In the years that have followed, I remember this event often, and each time I do, it still scares me. Sometimes a few seconds can change things drastically in your life. Number 3. Home. The scariest experience that scarred me for life happened when I was living by myself in a small one-bedroom home. The house wasn't in a typical neighborhood, and I hope you know what I mean, like a subdivision where there are houses lined up and down the streets of the neighborhood. Nor was it in the middle of nowhere. The house was set back along a minor highway. There were other houses along the road, along the highway, but not very close together. If you had lived in one of those houses, you could guarantee that you could listen to loud music whenever you wanted, and not bother the people that lived around you. My house had a nice front and side yard. There were a lot of trees, and therefore there was a lot of shade too. It was a perfect little house. Living alone for the first time in my life, I found myself very happy in the house. As I mentioned earlier, that you could listen to loud music, or you could have parties without bugging your neighbors. These were not things that I did really. But it absolutely was the first time that I lived alone, and I wasn't prepared at first for how frightening an experience that could be. I don't mean I was scared of the dark or anything like that, but there were certain times at night, or during snowstorms or thunderstorms, when I found myself getting slightly scared, which is something I hadn't had much of a problem with before. And just one of those nuances of living by yourself, I guessed. And not only that, but the house was pretty old too, so there were little creaking noises often at night. But despite the little scary things, I only once got truly terrified while I was living in that house, and that happened during a weekend. Even if nothing scary had happened, I probably would have remembered this scary weekend anyway. We had 2 full days of some of the strongest thunderstorms I can remember in my life. The storms began on the Friday afternoon. If you were the type of person who really enjoys watching storm clouds, these were beautiful. The lightning, once it got dark outside, was so bright that you could see everything clearly in the dark. A lot of the thunder sounded like bombs going off. On Friday evening, I was watching some scary movies. Of course, the storms made watching the movies a lot scarier than usual, but up until that point, all the fear was really just enjoyment fear. You know, like the kind you get from watching a horror movie during a thunderstorm. I didn't have a car at the time. When I went to work, I took a bus. And with how bad it was storming the next day, I really couldn't go anywhere. So I spent the whole day at home, watching more movies and enjoying the storm. By that night, I had decided to go to bed a little earlier. I guess 2 days of it being dark and rainy and stormy outside made me get tired pretty quickly, so I went up the stairs to my bedroom. I should have explained what my house looked like. I mentioned it was a one-bedroom house, but it was also a 2-story house. But the only thing upstairs was the bedroom. The stairs literally went right directly to the door of the room. I went to sleep pretty easily that night. I don't know what it is about storms, but they can also have a relaxing effect while in bed. It was a crashing noise that woke me out of my sleep. When getting up, I started wondering what the noise was. I was quickly able to determine that it was not from my bedroom. So then the obvious answer was something had happened downstairs. I didn't have any pets at the time, so a lot of things were running through my head before I climbed out of bed. I slowly walked over to the top of the steps, and I took a deep breath before I even thought about doing anything. "Hello?" I asked, and immediately wished that I had not. But of course there was no answer. I stood there, waiting longer. I realized I would have to go down the steps at some point, so I took a couple steps down. The back of my house had a sliding glass door in it. The door faced the stairs. As you went down the small staircase, the doors came into view. And when they did this time, I realized that the door was open and shattered. I stopped walking down the stairs, wondering what might have happened. The storm was still raging on outside, so I thought about it some more. And after having several scary ideas running through my head, I decided that I must have left the door unlocked or unlatched. The pressure from the storm must have caused it to open. Bringing myself to the conclusion actually calmed me down for a moment. I was about to step down to close the door and then clean up the mess. Right before I could take the first step down, though, I watched as a dark figure ran from behind the staircase and straight out the back door. I'm not sure how much time I spent standing there, looking out the door. It was still storming and water was getting into my house, but I couldn't even think about it as I reflected on what I had just seen. Someone had broken into my house, and I stood on the stairs as they had done whatever they did. When I could finally move, I made it down the stairs and went to call the police. I then went and put towels on the floor, and then went over to the couch, thinking about what had happened. The police figured, since my lights were out and I had no car, that the burglar thought that my house was empty. There was a few items missing from the living room and the kitchen, the most expensive being my iPod and my tablet. Most of the other valuable things were in my bedroom, which I assumed the burglar would have gone to next had I not gotten up. I was never made aware that the guy was caught either. I left the lights on downstairs for a long time after that. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to click the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.